It's a great stronghold today. We must confront it. I'm talking about the spirit of fear.
It's time for The Line of Fire with your host, activist, author, international speaker, and theologian, Dr. Michael Brown, your voice of moral, cultural, and spiritual revolution. Michael Brown is the director of the Coalition of Conscience and president of Fire School of Ministry. Get into The Line of Fire now by calling 866-34-TRUTH. That's 866-34-TRUTH. Here again is Dr. Michael Brown.
Friends, we've got to confront this. We've got to talk about the elephant in the room. I'm talking about the prevailing attitude of fear, the spirit of fear, because of COVID. We need to talk about it. We need to talk it through so that we can be rational in our decision-making, wise in our decision-making, and not moved by fear or paralyzed by fear. Welcome, friends, to the broadcast. Michael Brown, delighted to be with you. 866-34-TRUTH is the number to call, 866-348-7884. A bunch of related things I want to talk to you about. I want to give you a picture of what's happening in Australia. I want to draw attention to things that I wrote last year and a half ago, when we quickly got out my book, When the World Stops, which produces words of hope, faith, and wisdom in the midst of crisis. So the book that I wrote in the midst of COVID, thinking, maybe number of weeks, number of months, this will pass, not knowing it would be here this long, but wanted to have something that would be relevant in the long term and other crises. So I want to talk about faith versus fear, feeding your faith versus feeding your fear, and what is wise versus unwise when it comes to decision-making with regard to COVID. Millions of Americans, others around the world, still facing decisions about being vaccinated or not, or how to conduct themselves, or school policies and what to go along with and what to protest, and decisions you may have to make as an administrator or leader or pastor. So we want to talk these through. 866-348-7884. On another front, you may have noticed, if you were on social media yesterday, that for hours, Facebook was down because that other apps of Facebook, WhatsApp, Instagram, were down. So this literally affects several billion people on the planet. And according to headlines that I saw, it cost Facebook and Mark Zuckerberg $7 billion being down for a few hours. I mean, I can't conceive of that. I can't conceive of, well, I could conceive of having millions of dollars. I could conceive that. I mean, we've all had some money. So you could conceive of maybe, okay, what would it feel like if you had hundreds of thousands in the bank or something? Again, I don't know, but I could conceive that. What would it feel like to have several $1 million in the bank? Okay, I could conceive that. Well, what about 1,000 million? That's $1 billion. That's hard to relate to what that really means. What about having so much money that in a matter of hours you can lose $7 billion? Who can relate to that? But I just want to say this. There is an extraordinary amount of power right now in the hands of social media, from Google, which also owns YouTube, to Facebook, which owns these other apps, to Twitter as well, but Twitter a little bit less than these others. Through search engines, through other means, there is an incredible amount of power. News flow can be influenced. Elections can be influenced. Choices that you make based on information you get can be influenced. There's even great concern about human trafficking, sex trafficking, and girls in particular, teenage girls being under assault because of social media. There's a tremendous amount of power. There is enough power to make or break organizations, individuals, ministries outside of God's help. It is inordinate. It is not good. It is not right. To the extent these things can be used constructively and neutrally, wonderful. To the extent people who have agendas are involved with them, or who have a particular ideological conviction that they will then foist on others, that's a problem. You say, well, they're private companies, they can do what they want. Well, yes and no. Let me explain. We work together, all of us who are on Facebook, YouTube, any of these other social media platforms, we worked together with them to make them what they are, right? You posted your videos on YouTube. You went to YouTube to watch videos. This generated advertising money for YouTube. You began to connect with a circle of friends on Facebook. You have a ministry and you began to post regularly to draw people to your ministry page with the rules being a certain way, right? So we built up to just under 600,000 on our Facebook page playing by those rules, and then those rules began to change. Things that you posted got restricted. I've illustrated, I've tested it. I've tested it. We'll post an important article and it can tie in with a political subject that is considered a hot subject and not to be promoted on the news now on Facebook, or simply because it's political, it's not going to be promoted, which means if you have liked our page, it won't come up in your newsfeed unless you specifically ask for certain things. And I'm not saying this with precision of algorithms and all this, just in general, that you used to see our posts, but now you won't. So we'll post something, an important article, and it's well-researched and it's well-written on a major topic that in the past would have gotten thousands and thousands and thousands of reactions, or maybe 10 or 20 or 30,000 reactions, or maybe 100,000 reactions on Facebook if it went viral, or more. We have plenty of articles like that. And we'll post it now, and you'll get 38 reactions or 74 reactions. And instead of 741 comments, you'll get 6 comments. Nancy was telling me the other day, she said, I just never see your stuff that you post. It just never comes up. And then when I look, there's 0 activity. So I'll see that. And then an hour later, I'll say, okay, let's just post something, a scripture verse or something like that, or a question. And I'll want to know. I mean, I'll post this with intent as well. Hey, when you hear the name Jesus, what comes to mind? Just to let people glorify the Lord and edify one another. And suddenly, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of comments coming in and things flowing in, or just post a scripture. It's like, okay, that went out. That didn't get restricted. That got the normal reaction. So the issue is we built together playing by certain rules. Now the rules changed. You know, we could get 10,000 new people. I'm not complaining. I'm just going somewhere with this. It's going to be a faith-building point in a moment, all right? But we could, in the past, say at the height of growth, maybe just organically, not paid in any way, maybe get 10,000 new followers in a week or 2 weeks on Facebook. And then they changed something in the algorithms, and this probably for everybody it got changed, and then things just slowed down. And then we could go months without seeing any addition. Whoever is added is equaled by people leaving. What happened? We built up to a certain place, and then the rules changed. The algorithms changed. Things changed. And I've talked to insiders who work closely, not within Facebook, but work closely with Facebook every day. So they're not employed by Facebook, but they are some of the major media players on Facebook. And they've told me the challenges that they have. They've told me what they experience. And I've documented. Now, I'm not complaining because God is bigger than Facebook. Compared to God, Facebook is less than a grain of sand on the sea. Compared to God, Facebook has the IQ of a worm minus a million, okay? And I'm not saying this to attack Facebook. I'm simply saying let's get things in perspective. Facebook, Google, the so-called masters of the universe, they're here today. They're going to be gone tomorrow. The same with nations of the earth. The same with world rulers. The book of Isaiah says that all the animals in Lebanon are not enough for a burnt offering to God. So the reality is that God is so much bigger than all this. So we continue to use these platforms as long as we can to get a message out. But my confidence is in God. And when I come on the radio every day as your voice of moral sanity and spiritual clarity, my trust is that God will get this message out. As I speak up for you and do my best to get our message out together and do my best to inform and equip you so you can be on the front lines making a difference, I'm confident that God has his ways of getting his message out. Over the weekend, I was seeking him earnestly for that very thing. Lord, you've given me words to speak. I'm trusting you to give me a way to get that message out to the maximum number of hearers and viewers. And together, friends, we can do that. Okay, let's look at this news headline. I saw this a few days ago and it got my attention. It was an NORC poll. And it says this: virus fears linger for vaccinated older adults. And then I looked at larger data. It says a new survey finds that vaccinated older adults are more worried about COVID-19 than the unvaccinated are. Okay, let's think about that for a moment. You're an older adult, you've been vaccinated, you should feel relatively safe because you believe in the science and therefore you've been vaccinated, right? So you know that you're not bulletproof, but you should feel fairly confident that, hey, I'm safe because I've been vaccinated. Even if I get sick, it won't be as bad as it could have been. That's what you understand the science would say. If you haven't been vaccinated, you are either thinking, look, I'll take my chances with COVID. I've got plenty of friends that got sick and recovered. They're fine. I'm healthy overall. Or you might be thinking, I know COVID's a problem, but I don't trust these vaccines. And if I put something in my body, that I'm definitely doing something that could be destructive. Whereas with COVID, we'll see what happens. I'm trying not to be exposed. I imagine that's some of the thinking. Now, it could be the unvaccinated are living in denial, and that's why they're not as fearful. And it could be that the vaccinated are living and they're in good touch with reality, which is why they are vaccinated. You could make that argument. But it doesn't make sense that they are more fearful. It doesn't make sense because if you're vaccinated, you should be less fearful. And certainly, all the unvaccinated are not anti-science. All the unvaccinated are not like ostriches sticking their heads in the ground, which indicates to me that fear continues to drive much of what's happening. I'm not telling you should or shouldn't be vaccinated. That's not my point at all. I'm not even arguing about the science being good science or bad science. Not discussing that at all right now, although we're going to play some clips from Project Veritas that are very interesting about natural immunity after getting COVID versus being vaccinated in terms of which is stronger for your immune system. I just want to point out that when you look at Canada with so many restrictions there, and yet the Trudeau government reelected, you look at California with so many restrictions there, and yet Governor Gavin Newsom survives the recall, that indicates to me that in the midst of all this, that people are saying, hey, we need these restrictions. We need these lockdowns. We need the masks on the kids. We need mandatory vaccinations. And a lot of what's driving that, friends, is fear. Fear is driving it. Fear paralyzes. Fear takes away your rational thinking. It's one of the 10 commandments, but what does it mean? You shall not bear false witness. Friends, this is something tremendously important in God's sight. It is when we testify to something that is not true against a friend, a neighbor, against an enemy, against a coworker. It is when we speak falsehood against someone else. It is damaging, it is ugly, it is destructive. Many of us just think of doing this in a court of law. Many of us just think, well, this doesn't really apply to me because I haven't been called as a witness. But friends, we violate this sometimes on a daily basis. We post things that are just hearsay. We repeat things. We share memes that are catchy but not necessarily true. We see something reported in the media, and if it's against someone we don't like, we go ahead and share it. We hear some rumor, some gossip, we repeat it to someone else. That is bearing false witness. We are called throughout the scriptures to speak the truth in love. We are told that when words are many, transgression is not absent, that we should have a filter on our hearts and on our lips, that we should be careful what we say, that we should be children of the truth, in the spirit of the truth, speaking the truth in love. Bearing false witness destroys lives. Bearing false witness can harm someone, and the harm can sometimes be irretrievable. When we post things irresponsibly, when we say things irresponsibly, when we get words out that are not true about others, it can damage them, it can hurt them, it can hurt their families, it can hurt their legacies. We must not bear false witness. If you're not sure about something, don't repeat it. If it shouldn't be repeated, hold on to it. Be jealous to guard the reputations of others, and only speak that which is good and helpful and right and edifying. We must not bear false witness.
It's The Line of Fire with your host, Dr. Michael Brown. Get into the line of fire now by calling 866-34-TRUTH. Here again is Dr. Michael Brown.
Thanks, friends, for joining us today on The Line of Fire, 866-34-TRUTH. Some months back, it was actually last year, so early on in COVID, one of my colleagues, himself a scientist or highly educated in science and an economist, he said that he was driving in his car, so windows up, driving in his car, pulled up next to someone. I guess they were stopping at a light. This person was in their car with windows up. And when the person saw him pull up next to him, they immediately went and put on their mask. Like, really quick, I got to get this on. He's thinking, what are people thinking? You're in your car with the windows up. I'm in my car with the windows up. How is it that being next to you in the car with windows up that somehow you might get infected with something? I mean, who would think like that? Now, look, I understand the reason for fear, that people who are sick, people who have died. I'm thinking about grads of ours, that are younger people, so in their 40s, and one was in ICU last year, the other's home now on oxygen and with daily medical checkups from healthcare workers and things like this. Other friends of ours have died, as far as we know, all directly related to COVID. I understand that on the one hand, but friends, there is no place for irrational fear. Using wisdom is one thing. Acting in a circumspect way is one thing. And my policy is, wherever I am, I follow the rules. So if the hotel when you're walking in says you need to have a mask on when you walk in, I put the mask on. If the restaurant says you need to have a mask on until you're seated and having your meal, then I put the mask on. Obviously, at the airport, from the moment you arrive to the moment you leave, unless you're eating between bites, then you take the mask off. So you play by the rules. Not a problem. Whether it works or not, whether it's wise or not, don't know. Those are the rules. I'm not bucking that. The question is this fear that grips, that dominates. Here, let me just read a few quotes to you from When the World Stops. Again, came out last year. Basically, I wrote it in an 8-day period. I was just writing so much about it, talking about it so much on the air. I said, let me grab some of the stuff, put it together, write fresh new material, including taking you through Psalm 91, verse by verse in Hebrew, to encourage you to take refuge in God with, and this is before vaccines were available or anything, right? But listen to this. Smith Wigglesworth said, fear looks, faith jumps. So I wrote some things down. Fear paralyzes, faith liberates. Fear brings death. So fear paralyzes, faith liberates. Fear brings death, faith brings life. Fear brings torment, faith brings peace. Fear listens to the devil's lies, faith listens to God's truth. While fear is irrational, faith is rational. While fear is natural, faith is supernatural. Fear looks at earthly circumstances and anticipates worst-case scenarios. Faith looks at God's promises and anticipates ultimate victories. Fear is fundamentally a denial of the existence of the God of the Bible. Faith is founded on who he is and what he does. So the point is this. Before you go about making COVID-related decisions, job-related decisions, family-related decisions, decisions that impact your kids. Let's say you live in California. Now there's mandatory vaccination for kids there, with K through 12 in schools, whatever the latest policies are. Maybe you're a healthcare worker and you've been told you have to be vaccinated, you lose your job. And you're trying to navigate this. You're trying to act with wisdom. The first thing I strongly encourage you to do is break that spirit of fear. You say, well, how can I tell the difference between the spirit of fear and acting with wisdom? Fear is oppressive. Fear is, you're going to get it. Something's going to happen. Something's going to happen to your kid. Something's going to hang over you. It's just ready to pounce. That's fear. That's destructive, friends. And look, we all can deal with it one way or another. Fear is a young person, you'll never get married. Fear is a woman that you'll never be able to have a child. Fear in ministry, you'll never reach your goals. Fear in business, everything's going to collapse. Fear about your health, fear about dying young, fear about whatever. And there's specific phobias, right? Some people are afraid to go outside. Some people are afraid of heights. Some people are afraid of being closed in. There are all kinds of different fears. And if you've ever had to deal with them, and here and there over the years, I've had to deal with a few, which struck me as very odd because in my whole walk with God and obedience to him, I'm fearless. Whatever he tells me to do is just go for it with joy. Others are cowering, I'm running into it. But then there are other fears I got hit with, and they're irrational. In other words, when someone's telling you, right, let's just say that you're on a plane and you suddenly feel claustrophobic. And someone's like, you're fine. Get up, you walk around, you're fine. And look, hundreds of people, they're all fine. It doesn't matter. It's irrational. If you have a fear of heights and you're in an elevator, it's like, okay, this elevator's gone up and down hundreds of thousands of times. You look out the little window here and says, you're fine. It doesn't matter because you're gripped, that fear. So fear is paralyzing, destructive, and a lot of the world is struggling with this now. They're really hurting. They're really hurting. And I don't say this to criticize or condemn in any way. I say this to come alongside and help and say, in Jesus, let's deal with these fears. In my book, When the World Stops, I have a chapter on feeding your faith versus feeding your fears. Feeding your faith versus feeding your fears. Be built up in God, be confident in God, grow as you know how through the word, through prayer, through facing these fears head on. Sometimes you need, if things are dominating your life, you need counsel and help. Sometimes it's deliverance. But here's the thing. As you are stronger in faith and these fears are dissipating, then you can think more clearly. And then you can make certain decisions. Hey, let's just take a look in Australia. I want to read much of an article to you that was posted on National Review. One of my colleagues in Australia posting regularly about what's happening there. And it seems almost beyond belief. But here's an article on National Review. Just came out a couple of days ago. When will someone hold human rights hearings on Australia? I mean, things are really extreme. So let me read from this article. Last month, Scott Morrison, Australia's Prime Minister, told the United Nations that his nation believes in freedom, respecting the rights and freedoms of the individual and the inherent dignity of all people, no matter the circumstances. His critics were stunned at the contrast between his lofty words and life today in much of Australia, which Tony Abbott, a former Prime Minister from Morrison's own party, has called a health dictatorship. The Prime Minister must live in a parallel universe, former Australian Senator David Leonhelm tweeted, while another commentator joked that Morrison should have called on the UN to restore human rights to Australia. Video bloggers quickly put together clips juxtaposing Morrison's speech with scenes of police firing rubber bullets at protesters. These are people protesting the lockdowns, pepper spraying an elderly lady, arresting people for eating a snack in a park without a mask, and tackling and choking various other people deemed to be in violation of COVID rules. I mean, this is all going on. And if you read the article, there are actual pictures that are being posted. All right, let's keep reading here. Soldiers and police helicopters patrol Sydney's streets and skies to enforce that city's lockdown. There are prohibitions on people traveling to neighboring states, even if it's to visit sick loved ones. Thousands of overseas Australians are unable to come home because of government limits on daily arrivals. Okay, let's just see. Look, there we go. Just scrolling down my article here. Enforcement of regulations has been highly arbitrary. In Queensland, outdoor mask mandates were imposed because of just 2 new COVID cases. In Victoria, Premier Dan Andrews has promised to lock out the unvaccinated from the economy. His words, lock out. While New South Wales has made the shot mandatory for public sector workers. But politicians are exempted. Check it out, friends. Check out the accuracy of this article. Politicians are exempted, and bans on Australians traveling in or out of their country are routinely waived for athletes, billionaires, and celebrities. Americans love Australians, and they see echoes of their own free and rugged history in Australia's own frontier founding. They take note of swashbuckling Australian nonconformists from Crocodile Dundee to Steve Irwin to Rupert Murdoch. But those images conflict with the jarring reality that part of Australian culture allows closet authoritarians to flourish. The late Clive James, who was one of Australia's best-known public intellectuals, said, quote, "The problem with Australians is not that so many of them are descended from convicts, but that so many of them are descended from prison officers. Rather than learn to live with the virus as an endemic disease that will keep circulating and mutating over time, Australians are being put through an endless cycle of lockdowns in a fruitless government attempt to eradicate COVID entirely. Sadly, Australian courts have not proven themselves up to the job of protecting individual rights." And Ramesh Thakur, an emeritus professor at the Australian National University, notes that, quote, "Courts have refused to provide redress no matter how arbitrary, draconian, unscientific, and ineffective the regulations. According to one analysis in the Sydney Morning Herald, public health measures issued under the enabling emergency powers can only be assessed as a package of measures, not individually. They could go on indefinitely if the health authorities just declare the emergency still exists." And friends, I've even read that there are estimates that more people have died of suicide than of COVID in Australia. Can't verify that, just some things I had read. What is driving a lot of this, friends, is fear. And then God knows how much is just some desire for government to take over. I don't know that, and I'm not making that charge. God knows. But certainly involved in much of this is a spirit of fear. Fear paralyzes. Here, it is paralyzing parts of a whole country. We'll be back with some shocking clips to listen to and to watch. Stay right here. You know, there are Jewish scholars who believe that Jesus was a good guy, that he was a rabbi, Orthodox rabbi, a fine Jewish teacher, and that he's not the one responsible for all the changes or founding, quote, Christianity. Rather, Paul changed things. You'll often hear that. There are liberal Christian scholars who believe the same thing, that Paul changed things, that he changed the gospel. Rabbi Shmuley, in his book, Kosher Jesus, that I answered and rebutted in my book, The Real Kosher Jesus, he holds to this view as well, that Paul started this whole thing, that Paul's the one who taught about vicarious suffering and Jesus dying as a substitute for our sins, and that Paul taught the deity of Jesus and introduced these new concepts. And some even look at verses, say like Romans chapter 2, verse 16, Romans 2:16, where Paul speaks of that day, on that day when, speaking of a final day of judgment, according to my gospel, God judges the secrets of man by Messiah Jesus. So, in other words, they're saying that Paul's saying God will judge man by my gospel. And that's because he preached this new message. Well, first, that's not how I read what he's saying. Rather, I understand what he's saying is, just as I teach in my gospel, God's going to judge everyone at the end. He's not saying God's going to judge everyone based on my specific gospel message, but rather as I preach, when I preach the gospel, my gospel message that I preach, I tell you that God's going to bring judgment. But here's what we know. And I've laid this out in volume 4 of my series, Answering Jewish Objections to Jesus. And David Wenham has a couple of great books on it. All of the major themes of the gospel that Jesus taught, Paul taught. And Jesus said in Mark 10 that he would be a ransom for our souls, and that the new covenant was made in his body and blood, which was broken for us and shed for us, and that he himself clearly identified as deity in a number of different passages in the Gospels, and that he appeared to Saul of Tarsus as the risen Lord, that Saul refers to him as Lord and bows down before him. So there is nothing new that Paul is introducing. Rather, Paul had the revelation that one day Gentile and Jew would be one in the Messiah, and that time had already come. That's what he understood, and that Gentiles did not need to become Jews in order to be saved. But all the fundamentals, I've laid it out, others have laid it out, all the fundamentals of the gospel, read in 1 Corinthians 15 where he lays them out. Those are the fundamentals taught by all the other apostles. Those are the fundamentals that we find in the gospels. And by the way, Paul couldn't just change everything without changing all of the early church, which was obviously not what happened. Rather, he was an esteemed fellow worker in the Lord.
It's The Line of Fire with your host, Dr. Michael Brown, your voice of moral, cultural, and spiritual revolution. Here again is Dr. Michael Brown.
Thanks, friends. Welcome to The Line of Fire. This is Michael Brown. Here's the number to call, 866-34-TRUTH. I'm going to open the phone lines up. Any question you have of any kind, any subject you want to talk to me about, anything you want to challenge me on, anywhere where you differ, by all means, give us a call, 866-348-7884. I spoke with a doctor the very end of last year, and he said when it came to COVID vaccines that he had many concerns about those vaccines and thought it was actually better to get COVID and get immune to it. Of course, this before a lot of the variants came in, et cetera, but that would be better and healthier than getting a vaccine. Now, that was his particular view. And the question is, how much does natural immunity help you? Now, Dr. Joel Fuhrman, whose medical guidelines we follow as far as eating and recommended way of living, Dr. Fuhrman said that if you are eating a totally healthy diet, and trust me, very few of us would qualify as eating a totally healthy diet based on his standards. Trust me on that one, okay? Get his book, The End of Dieting, if you want to get the details. But that's how we've sought to live and follow those guidelines. But he said if you're at your ideal weight and you are eating a totally healthy regimen lifestyle, following that is 1,000 times more effective than any vaccine. So that was his position on that subject. Not saying you should or shouldn't get vaccinated, simply saying the best thing you could do is eat in a totally healthy way and be at your ideal weight. And even if you're not at your ideal weight, if you are losing weight regularly, a couple pounds a week at least, by eating completely healthily, then you are also strengthening your body in terms of your immune system. So let's take it a step further. What if you actually get COVID? What about the natural immunity in that? What happens with that? So Project Veritas, James O'Keefe, known for their expose videos exposing Planned Parenthood for selling body parts of aborted babies and things like that, they've been putting out a series of videos speaking with high-level scientists, people involved with Pfizer and other companies involved with vaccines. And I have no question that your average medical professional wants to help people medically. So it's a job for them, but they're also doing something that is important to them, that they got into this field not just for money, but also to help people. My assumption is that your average doctor, your average nurse wants to help people, right? Obviously not everyone. Just like, my assumption is your average person in ministry wants to help people in a spiritual sense. My assumption is your average healthcare provider wants to help people in a natural sense. And that's why they do what they do. I would also assume that the higher up you get and the more money there is to be made, the more there can be mix of motivation. Would you agree with that? That's human nature. Look, if you're doing ministry and you're not making a dime, you're having to work extra hours in order to pay for this missions outreach that you're doing to go help certain people. You're not motivated by greed. And you're getting rejected and hated in the process. You're not motivated by fame. But if your ministry endeavors can bring you lots of money, or if the books you write can bring you lots of money, then there can be that temptation to do things in a certain way to bring in money. It's human nature. You may start a business with the goal of, hey, I want to get so rich that I can give away 90% of my income, live simply, give away 90% of my income to help the poor and the needy. The problem is, as that money starts coming in, you start to get attracted to the money more. And soon enough, your whole lifestyle changes and standards change and everything else changes. So it happens. The love of money is the root of all kinds of evil. So it wouldn't surprise me if the higher up you go with these companies, even if genuinely they want to help deal with COVID or eradicate COVID or have vaccines that will lessen the effects of COVID, even if there's a large part of the activity that is praiseworthy, you have to wonder, is all the information getting out? Are you getting all of the contrary facts? In fact, before we play these clips for you, check out this headline from Israel. This is really, really interesting news from Israel because the vast majority of the people in Israel are vaccinated. And it's all Israel news. So Joe Rosenberg's site, it is not Israel bashing. In fact, it's Israel friendly. Silenced, ? Israel's health ministry removes comments claiming adverse effects from the COVID vaccine on its social media posts. Isn't that interesting? They've admitted to removing them. Now, they said, well, a lot of it was fake news. Maybe some of it was fake news. The question is, why not let facts get out, let information get out, let people do the research? Why suppress things? If you're interested in a certain spiritual subject and you come to me and you really want to understand, say, I'm debating between these two positions. I say, well, no, stay away from the other, but don't listen to them. Stay away from them. Just listen to me. It's all dangerous stuff. Okay, maybe I really think it is, but if I was that person, that seeker, I'd think, well, why can't I evaluate both sides? Shouldn't I be able to evaluate both sides? Anyway, let's listen to clip number 1. This is, again, Project Veritas speaking with a Pfizer worker about natural immunity after getting COVID versus the effectiveness of the vaccine.
So your antibodies are probably better at that point than the vaccination.
Nick Carl is an experienced biochemist at Pfizer with a history of working in the pharmaceutical industry. Nick admits to our undercover journalist that those who've had COVID have stronger immunity than those who've received the Pfizer COVID vaccine.
When somebody is naturally immune, like they got COVID, they probably have better, like not better, but more antibodies against the virus. Because what the vaccine is like I said, that protein that's just on the outside. So it's just one antibody against one specific part of the virus. When you actually get the virus, you're going to start producing antibodies against like multiple pieces of virus. And not only just like that outside portion, like the inside portion, the actual virus. So your antibodies are probably better at that point than the vaccination.
But don't take his word for it. 2 other Pfizer scientists echo the same sentiment.
So I'm well protected?
Yeah.
Like as much as the vaccine?
Probably more.
How so? Like how much more?
You're protected most likely for longer since it was a natural response.
We're like bred and taught to be like vaccine is safer than actually getting COVID. You cannot like talk about this like in public. If you have antibodies built up, like you should be able to prove that you have those built up.
So these are all Pfizer scientists. All them Pfizer scientists. They're not saying don't get vaccinated. They're not saying their vaccine is a bad product. They're not saying any of that. They're simply saying what is common sense, that the way God set up our physical system, that when you do get the virus and then your body fights it off, then it develops antibodies to prevent you from getting that virus again, and it can do it in a way that's more comprehensive than the vaccine. Now, obviously, there are things you don't want to get. They'll kill you in the process, right? We understand that. And no one is saying to go out and be reckless. Not saying that at all. It's just you're not hearing this as much as you would expect to hear it. And you have people who've had COVID that still have to get vaccinated, even though these scientists are telling you that your natural immunity would be stronger than the vaccine. All right, one more clip. Another scientist at Pfizer talking about the culture of suppression of contrary information there and the question of money.
I mean,
I still feel like I work for like an evil corporation because it comes down to profits in the end. And I mean, I'm there to help people, not to make millions and millions of dollars. So I mean, that's the moral dilemma.
Billions and billions.
I'm trying to be nice.
No, yes, I hear you. I do. I mean, I'll still give you a hard time about it.
Basically, our organization is run on COVID money now.
How so?
Like, it netted like over 15 billion last year. There's ears and eyes everywhere.
What do you mean?
At Pfizer, like in the building. So it's kind of just like you don't talk about anything that can possibly implicate you or like big pharma. Like even if you shut the door to the office, it's kind of like who's listening.
Yeah. So again, this is an individual, and here we have his name, going on record there in terms of what he's saying. Senior associate scientist at Pfizer, saying that you can't say things contrary. Now, look, there may be a million explanations for things. There may be all kinds of reasons why you can't speak about this or that, or I don't know. And this is his opinion. I understand that. It does confirm the idea, though, that contrary information is being suppressed. That's what concerns me. You say, but there are a lot of conspiracy theories out there. Well, since when were conspiracy theories banned so that you can't post them? I mean, you could publish a book with conspiracy theories in the past. You put that out. You could make videos and distribute them. You could get material out. Now we have the internet to get material out. How do you know that all the data you're getting, and I've talked to Nancy about this, how do you know it's accurate? Nancy is one of those people that digs and digs and digs. I don't know anybody that when they get focused, digs in a focused way more than my wife, Nancy. I don't know anybody. Seriously. I mean, it could be the smallest thing, but she's curious about it. She's doing something in the garden. You're curious about that. And I'm talking about it can be hundreds of articles, videos, read, researched to get all sides to make sure that she's doing things in an informed way. And then when it comes to COVID, she goes, how can you tell? In other words, there is so much contrary information. And the problem is the concern that things are being suppressed. So isn't this the way to do things? Bring the truth to the light. Bring everything to the light and let the light reveal what's true and what's not. Rather than suppress things, bring it to the light. Let us do the research. Let us think for ourselves. Let us listen to professionals on different sides and then come to informed conclusions. But my appeal again, let's get the information out and let's break the spirit of fear that so dominates our thinking. We come back. Talk about someone wants to change God's pronouns. So what about the black Hebrew Israelites, or as they sometimes call themselves, the Hebrew Israelites? Are they a dangerous cult? Oh, yes, absolutely. You might have some who are very mild in their views, who simply believe that as blacks, that they are the original descendants of Israel, and they preach salvation through Jesus like anyone else. Okay, that's fine. But the ones that you find on the street corners, the ones that you find aggressively putting forth their message, they are full of hostility, they are full of hatred, they are bigoted, they are Jew haters. In other words, someone like me, they claim that we are the manifestation of Satan, that the white man is the manifestation of Satan. Many of them do not preach the Jesus of the Scripture in any real respect. They preach a cult figure, Yeshua, or whatever name they give to him. And they would say that basically all blacks are the original descendants of Israel. So are there black Jews? Yes, absolutely. Like there are white Jews. Are there black Israelites? Yes, just like there are white Israelites. But are all blacks the descendants of the people of Israel? No, of course not. Categorically not. That is not so. That's part of their false teaching. Many of them are thoroughly legalistic in their teaching and then add in other customs. They are a cult. They are dangerous. They're spreading. Here's what Paul wrote in 2 Corinthians, the 11th chapter. He had this concern. He said this: if someone comes and proclaims another Jesus than the one we proclaimed, or if you receive a different spirit from the one you received, or if you accept a different gospel from the one you accepted, you put up with it readily enough. There is something happening now with the Hebrew Israelites, with the black Hebrew Israelites, especially in inner cities, especially in different African-American communities in America, where they are gaining more and more following. But because they bring people into bondage, not freedom, because they practice hate and promote hate rather than love, because they preach another Jesus, when we bring the real message of truth and liberty and salvation through the Messiah, not through a white Jesus, but through the biblical Messiah, they'll find liberty.
Moral, cultural, and spiritual revolution. Get into the line of fire now by calling 866-34-TRUTH. Here again is Dr. Michael Brown.
Thanks for joining us on the line of fire, 866-34-TRUTH. I will get to some calls in a moment. Two things first. You know, if you've listened for any length of time, that God helped me radically transform my lifestyle beginning in August of 2014. Went from 275 pounds to 180 pounds, but everything turned upside down just by getting rid of all the unhealthy foods I'd eaten and eating healthy foods day and night. And it's transformed my life. Of course, continue to exercise, but it's transformed my life. Now, my life's in God's hands. I seek to use wisdom in everything that I do as well. Don't seek to abuse things. And in addition to that, God has my future in his hands. So I'm not boasting about tomorrow. I'm simply saying that doing this has been life transforming. And then I take supplements. For example, I take immune wellness supplements from Dr. Mark Stengler. I take Joint Plus supplements because I started to get arthritis in my hands, and this completely arrested the arthritis. It stopped once I started taking those supplements. So we have partnered together with Dr. Stengler. He is considered the nation's leading naturopathic doctor, author of probably close to 40 books now, and loves the Lord. That's is a man that loves God, does outreach on a regular basis, which is one of the cutest things. He's a brilliant guy. He'll be talking to someone and just like simple everyday guy, and just they have no answers because he's got the truth on his side. But we have partnered together with Dr. Stengler. So I want to encourage you to go to vitaminmission.com. Vitaminmission.com, whether you're looking for supplements to help you sleep or help with digestive system or other issues or energy or immunity or just general multivitamins. Go to the website. You'll find out about a special code that you can use that will get you a discount there on everything. So finest health supplements I know of, check them out. You'll get a discount when you go there as well. And with every order, Dr. Stengler makes a donation to our ministry. So everybody benefits. So vitaminmission.com, the place to go. Okay. Mark Silk in the Washington Post Religion News has proposed that we make a gender change when it comes to God. That rather than wrestling with he or she, many people will just say they. We just say it generically, they. Talking about people in general. So rather than have masculine notions when it comes to God, why not use they about the Lord? And he says, why our preferred pronoun for God should be they. Grammatically, if you can say you are, you can say they is. Okay. Let's put aside the issue of saying you are versus they is. Let's put that aside entirely because that's a grammatical issue that is 100% unrelated to the subject of how God revealed himself to us. We understand that God transcends gender. Yes, of course. We also understand we are created in God's image, and that includes male and female. We understand that. We also understand when God revealed himself, he revealed himself using masculine pronouns. So, for example, the divine name normally vocalized Yahweh, which occurs about 6,300 times in the Hebrew Bible, is always vocalized with he. It is always, with a pronoun he. If it's going to be used in that way grammatically, it's always male. God has revealed himself to us as the Heavenly Father. That's important. Ephesians 3 says all fatherhood gets its name from him. In other words, there are concepts having to do with the Father that God wants us to relate to with him as Father. He has put the Spirit of his Son into our hearts, by which we cry out, Abba. And when he comes into this world, he comes in the person of Jesus. So he comes through a woman, but in the person of Jesus, a man. Again, this is how God revealed himself. Jesus is not a they. The Father is not a they. The Holy Spirit is not a they. God, the Lord, is not a they. So all the pronouns used, all the verbal forms used are going to be masculine in keeping with that. You say, but aren't there times when the Holy Spirit or the word spirit can be feminine? Yeah, the Hebrew word and the Greek word spirit can be feminine or can have a neutral form. But the point of the matter there, again, is that there are many aspects of who God is. There are aspects of how he works. There are ways that he relates like a mother to a child. I mean, this is in Scripture, all right? But he says a phrase, Mark Silk says a phrase such as God the Father should be related as a metaphor. And for those concerned about the embedded misogyny of the tradition, to say nothing of post-binary folks, a deeply problematic one. No, it's nothing problematic about it. What's problematic is that we've lost sight of the meaning of who God is. We've lost sight of the fact that he made us male and female, that these are distinctions that God put biologically in the human race for a purpose, and that he wants us to know him as the Father, as the source of all things. And that's why he put the Spirit of his Son into our hearts, crying out, Abba, not Ima. All right? Ima being mother, Abba being father. So it is utterly ludicrous to downgrade this into just grammar. This is how God chose to reveal himself. It's got nothing to do with misogyny. It's nothing to do with male supremacy. It's simply how God revealed himself. The fact that God came into our world in the person of his Son, Jesus, does not mean that men are superior to women. It is simply a functional thing in the way God set things up and the way he has revealed himself and the way we relate to him. And you might as well, instead of talking to your earthly mother and father, just refer to them as they from there on. Or instead of saying I have a boyfriend or a girlfriend, a husband or wife, just refer to them as they. No, that destroys the meaning of who they are. So another passing fad, another ridiculous idea, and a few people will get into it, but forget about it. The eternal God has revealed himself. Case closed. All right, let's go to the phones, and we'll go to Carl in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. Welcome to the Line of Fire.
Hello, Dr. Brown. You're doing better with Coeur d'Alene.
Yeah. I figured second time around I did it. Yeah.
Hey, I have just recently read some writing by Wayne Grudem from his systematic theology treatise on eschatology, and he states that he's an historic premillennialist, not dispensational. At a time in the past, I read a book by R.C. Sproul who said he was a preterist. I've heard podcasts from Reformed people that seem to lean toward a kind of a dominion theology. We're going to Christianize the world before the Lord comes back. My church that I've been with for a long time is affiliated now with a Reformed group, and there's never anything on last times that they put out there in their teaching or writing. Is there a majority position that Calvinists and Reformed people hold on eschatology? It's hard for me to discern where they stand on eschatology.
Right,
Do you have any thoughts on that?
I would say that the majority are not premillennial. That would be my thought. Whether they're amillennial or whether they're postmillennial, and included in postmillennials or they're preterists, I would assume that they are more prominently either amillennial or postmillennial, and again, under postmillennial would be included some preterists. But because Calvinism is not an eschatological theme, it is a theological theme, it's not going to necessarily dictate an outcome in terms of eschatology. So the 5 points of Calvinism, which were formed in response to Arminian points, TULIP, total depravity, unconditional election, limited atonement, irresistible grace, and perseverance of the saints, none of those tie in with eschatology. So why is it that the majority of Reformed Christians are non-charismatic, whereas Wayne Grudem is charismatic? Why is it that the majority of them don't see Israel today as a fulfillment of prophecy and or are not historical premillennialists, as Wayne Grudem is a historical premillennialist? That's difficult to say. When you go to postmillennialism, that was widely believed through the 1800s in America. For example, Jonathan Edwards thought that the millennial kingdom could be on the edge of ascendancy because of the great awakenings that he witnessed in the 1740s. He speculated that perhaps this could be the time, and that it would begin in America and spread around the world. Later, he ended up revising his views, I believe, to suggesting the year 2000, so it would be 6,000 years of human history and then 1,000-year rest and time of millennial rule. Charles Finney in the 1830s thought that with the awakenings they were experiencing, that within 3 years the millennium could begin. So Finney was obviously not Calvinist. Jonathan Edwards was. They were both post-millennialists. Post-millennialism took a real hit with World War I, World War II, and has recovered some. Preterism is making a comeback, and to me there's some real issues with preterism, and full preterism in many ways must be utterly rejected. But if you look back to the Puritans in the 1600s, John Owen, the great theologian, and Samuel Rutherford, others, they had a great expectation about the restoration of Israel. Charles Spurgeon, one of the great Calvinist leaders in the 1800s, had a clear expectation about the physical restoration of Israel, said there's nothing in the Bible that's spoken of as plainly as that. Today, again, it may be the majority are not premillennials. Certainly the majority are not dispensationalists. The majority are also not charismatic. But is there one position that's preeminent right now? I don't know. If it is, I don't know. But anyway, great question, and I appreciate you asking. Hey, friends, join us tomorrow right here on The Line of Fire, this same station or this same podcast or this same YouTube channel. However you're taking in the broadcast, share it with friends. Would you do that? If we've been a blessing to you, share it with others.